our Zoom account where we also welcome our friends from ICANN, Sarmat Hussein and Champika. I don't think that they need any further introductions. And this is the first in the series of our webinars, joint webinars for the Asia Pacific community. Not a techie, I wouldn't really try to explain what the webinar is going to be about. So I believe that those on the call are perfectly aware of the topic. And I would, for now, leave the floor, pass the floor to Champika and Sarmad to walk us through what seems to me a very sophisticated issue. So without any further introductions, Champika, Sarmad, the floor is yours. Let me just remind everyone that we are happy to take questions at any time in the chat box, or if you just want it, you can raise your hand. And also we will have a Q&A session at the end of our webinar. And if you please mute your microphones for now, so that we can have a clear sound. Thank you very much. And here we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Leonid. So this is Sarmad Hussain, and Champika and I will take you through the training as Leonid shared. We would like this to be a very interactive session, so please raise your hand to speak up at any time during the discussion, or feel free to post your questions in the chat or comments in the chat, and we'll be happy to pick them up from there as well. The topic of today's webinar is configuring for internationalized email addresses, or we also call it as email address internationalization. This is a joint collaboration between APTLD and ICANN, and is, as Leonid shared, a part of a series of programs we are intending to do together for the APAC community. Next slide, please. So just a very quick overview of what we're intending to do through this program. We have the first training, which is organized today, which is focused on EAI. This is largely focused on people who are more involved in the as system administrators or system engineers for configuring email servers. We are also planning a training to focus on technical audience from a programming background, which will focus on how to support universal acceptance from a programming perspective. And then we are also planning more policy-oriented discussion towards as part of the third webinar in the series. And based on the interest from the community, we will continue to hold additional seminars as well, based on what feedback we receive. And you can find more details about this at both APTLD and ICANN pages. Next slide, please. So as an overview of the current webinar, we will take you through an introduction to what is universal acceptance and email address internationalization as part of universal acceptance. We will talk about configuring for email address internationalization support, and share the status of some of the email tools in this context. And finally, we will also share some considerations related to setting up mailbox names once EAI is configured on your end. We will also do a few quiz questions just to make sure that everybody's um, following what we're doing, and obviously for some excitement. And we'd like to take question and answers as we go, but we will hopefully leave some time at the end for any more general questions and answers. With that, I will hand it over to Champika to take us through first couple of parts of the training. So over to you, Champika.
Thank you, Samad, and thank you all for joining us this morning. And I hope that you can hear me clearly and you can see me as well, and the slides also. So as Samad mentioned, I will go through some of the introductory bits and then go into discuss about the details into more of the email address internationalization part as well. So first of all, we have to really understand actually the purpose of universal acceptance, the conceptual aspect as well, and then what we are trying to achieve here. So as you can see, the goal is that all the domain names and email addresses should work in all the software applications. Um, Sometimes you might wonder that, okay, why are we talking about it now? Because we have been using all these years. We've been using software applications, and we've been using domain names and email addresses and so on. But the thing is, you also have to understand the fact that DNS has also evolved over a period of time, especially the top level domains and so on. DNS was introduced long time ago, about 40 years ago or so, and then the TLD space, the TLDs has evolved quite a lot. And then especially nowadays we have new generic top level domains, and then the IDN domains and so on. So based on that, we also have the email IDs in local language scripts. So the question is whether all these software applications that we have been using can support this change, can adapt to this. So that's the main thing about the universal acceptance readiness here. So as you can see, there are a few key elements to this. First of all, of course, your application should be able to accept these, then validate, process, store, and display. Say, for example, now today for this training, you may have registered through a certain registration form. And then if you have given, say, your email ID from one of these, say, from a local language scripts point of view, if your email ID is not being accepted by the form or by the web application, then there is a problem there. So that's what we are trying to actually address here. So basically, the application should be able to accept, validate, process, and if you are storing in databases, you should be able to store it properly in the database fields and so on. And then, of course, the application should be able to display these domain names and the email addresses correctly. So as you can see, with this process, there's a big impact. Obviously, this will promote the consumer choice, improve the competition, and provide much broad access to the end users in terms of selecting domain names and email addresses. So that is actually the context that we are talking about. Okay, now let us go into understand these different categories of domain names and email addresses. Now, there are few things that we are looking at here. One is, of course, the IDNs, or internationalized domain names. I'm sure like most of you are quite familiar with IDNs. And basically, we represent domain names in our local language scripts here. And then we also have EAI, that is the acronym that we use for email address internationalization. So basically, having the emails also in our local language scripts as well. Now, one of the things that we have to be quite well aware here in this whole discussion is about UTF-8 format. This is an encoding scheme. Now, from historical point of view, we have been using ASCII. So ASCII stands for American Standard Code for Information Interchange. So in ASCII, actually, very early days when we use, say, for example, the Latin-based, the English scripts, for example, that is all fine because, we could use all those glyphs, the characters, and then several other characters as well, usually in the keyboard. But the thing is that when we consider, say, the local language scripts, there are some limitations that ASCII cannot handle. So this is where we have to look into some other encoding schemes. Now, there have been some proprietary encoding schemes as well, in the past, but UTF, or UTF stands for Unicode Transformation Format, UTF-8 format is considered as the standard in these IDNs and EAI. Now, even in UTF-8, even in Unicode, there have been a few other encoding schemes like UTF-16 or UTF-32 and so on. But considering number of factors like, say, the optimal storage, the variable number of bytes, that are involved in the storage and transmission, and so on, UTF-8 is actually much more optimal. And also it is backward compatible with ASCII as well. So that is why we are considering UTF-8 here. So that's something on the UTF-8. So now when it comes to domain names, traditionally we have been using TLDs with 3 characters, like, say .com or .net and .edu and so on. These were, generic top-level domains. But from year 2000 or so, obviously, like, we had domains like .info and so on, so more than 3 characters. And then in more recent times, there have been new generic top-level domains as well. So these were the new GTLDs, scripts like, for example, here you can see example.sky. Now, .sky is a 3-character domain name, but it is a new generic top-level domain. It's a new one. And similarly, you will also see longer top-level domains. So this is actually more than those 3 characters. So you will see, if you take example.abu Dhabi here, so that is considered as a longer top-level domain. And then we also have internationalized domain names. So if you can speak these characters in Chinese scripts, so that is an internationalized domain name. So these are some examples of these domain names that we are talking. Then when we come to internationalized email addresses, we call these as EAI, as I said, email address internationalization. Now, there are a few different formats that we are considering. You can see generally in an email ID, the left side part is considered to be an mailbox. So this, in this case, you can have an ASCII mailbox, and then your domain can be an IDN domain, right? So, like this example, in this case, mark is a ASCII string, whereas in this case, this society is different. It's not really an ASCII string. And in the same way, there could be a format where you have the mailbox in UTF-8 format, as I said earlier, and then the domain can be ASCII form like this. And then mailbox also can be UTF-8 format, and then the domain also can be in IDN as well. So these are different representation. And in all these email addresses, we write the email addresses from left to right. but then there are some scripts that is being written from right to left as well. For example, like Arabic script, it is written from right to left. So in this Arabic email ID, the right part is actually the mailbox, and then the this side left is actually the domain. So you can see that there are many forms of email IDs here. The whole point about that universal acceptance that I was talking about, if you are giving any of these email IDs in, say, in a form or any application, the application should be able to accept these and process and do all those fundamental things that we discussed earlier. We have also actually done some surveys to analyze actually how these EAI addresses are being handled by different websites and so on globally. So you can see that over the years, now these statistics, these data, you can see from 2017 to 2020 or so. Over the years, we have seen some improvement, right? And also these are some examples where you have Arabic email ID, and then the support, the percentage as a percentage, how many of those websites could support this. You can see it's quite a low percentage, less than 10% or so. Similarly, Chinese mailboxes and Chinese domain names, and then we get to Chinese, say, mailboxes and ASCII domains and so on, right? So there are different few formats, ASCII, new TLD, new long TLDs, and then new short TLDs and so on. So when it becomes new short, obviously the support is much better, almost more than 90% or so. But still, it doesn't really reach 100% because mostly many of the applications, many of the websites do still consider that traditional domains like .com and so on. Also, actually, further looking at some of the mail server support, because as you know, when we send emails, it looks at DNS and the MX records and look at the mail servers. So considering these domains, we also see that only less than 10% of those samples that taken into consideration were able to actually, those mail servers able to actually support this. So that is again, from mail servers point of view, it is pretty low as well. So what does the statistics tell us? Actually, that means many of the email servers, many of the applications are not yet ready to actually handle internationalized emails. So this is where we have to actually look into this and try to understand what are the things that we should consider in supporting EAI, or email address internationalization. Now, let us look at some of the aspects actually considering an email. Now, when you consider an email message, there are a few parts in it. We have an envelope. So this is basically where you have, the from field, who is sending, who is the sender, and then recipient, basically the receipt. And so this information is there in the envelope. And then we have the message header. Now, message header, it can have number of fields, of course. There are some free format fields. So these are basically for typically for users benefit. Users can, these are being used by the users, right? And then you also have fixed format fields as well. Now these are mainly for the devices. These fields, things like the date or message ID and so on. And then you will also see some of the fields where you have mixed of free formats and fixed formats as well, where you have, in the header. Now, so we have the envelope, then we have the message header, as you can see in the diagram here. And then we have the email message body itself. Now, so far, of course, we are not here, we are not talking about the message body, right? Our focus here is about the envelope and the message header. Because as you know, even now, if you consider a traditional, ASCII based email ID, you can still have your email body in say, local language scripts and so on, because that is all part of data, and that is not a problem here. What our focus here is about the envelope and the message header, right? Now, also, actually, there are some references where we have included, if someone needs for more information about this, you can also, there are some support reference documents available from uasg.tech website. So this is the Universal Acceptance Steering Group website, basically. And so let us also try to focus a bit more on to the email systems. Now, there are a number of components in an email system. Now, first of all, I mean, there are certain abbreviations for these. We simply call MUA. So MUA stands for Mail User Agent. So Mail User Agent is simply a client program. Generally, as you know, all of us, we have our email client programs, right? And that's what we call MUA. Then also we have something called MSA. MSA stands for Mail Submission Agent. So this is a server program that receives the mail from the client, or the MUA, basically. And then it prepares the mail for transmission and the delivery. So that is the job of the Mail Submission Agent. And then we also have MTA. MTA stands for Mail Transmission Agent. Simply, this is what we call as mail servers, right? And because sometimes the mail submission agent can also be part of MTA as well. And then MTA will then MTA is the function that looks at where the mail should be delivered, and then look at DNS and see what are the mail servers, the host names, and then deliver those on those host names. And then sometimes in some occasions, of course, we could be delivering it to the receiving end itself, but then sometimes this mail can also go through a number of MTAs in between as well. So that's the MTA. Then we also have MDA, that stands for Mail Delivery Agent. So this is a server program that handles the incoming mail. So generally, this is stored, typically the mail stored in a mailbox or the folder. So the client can basically, get these emails or download the emails. Now, there are different, of course, protocols that we use in these deliveries. Now, here, of course, obviously, as we discussed earlier, we have to consider the email. When we talk about email address internationalization, we have to consider that UTF-8 format and how these different elements, or MUAs, MSAs, MTAs, and so on, whether they can handle this UTF format properly. That is the whole idea. Okay, so when it comes to the email address internationalization, then what is an EAI? So that means having UTF-8 support for the mailbox name. So that is actually before the @sign, and then also domain name, that is after the @sign, right? So in this case, we tell that as EAI. Now, what is not an EAI? Here, as I told you earlier, we are not talking about message body, the subject line, or address commands and things like that. So that is not relevant to the EAI discussion. And because these are usually handled by the MIME, in general convention in email, and also it could be also some other encoding formats other than UTF-8 as well, right? That is not relevant to this discussion. So currently, if you look at the levels of EAI implementations, there are again few stages that we have to think about, we have to consider. Now, first of all, currently there is no EAI support. So what do you mean by that? Basically, those systems can only handle ASCII email addresses, right? All the tools, the applications, the mail servers, and so on. They can only handle the ASCII email. So in this case, we say, okay, we don't have any EAI support there. And then when we speak of level 1 support, the idea here is that it can exchange emails with EAI addresses and provide basically, email, the receiving of email from an EAI address can be done. So if I can send it to an EAI email address, that is also good. So basically, I can send it to an EAI address, and then I can also receive from an EAI address, but I cannot create a mailbox and a domain name in UTF-8. Sometimes, if you say in some mail systems, say in some email programs, you may be able to handle these. You may be able to receive emails from local language scripts, or you may be able to send it to local language script based EAI email addresses. But if you want to create your own email ID using your own language script, then that doesn't allow you. So that is actually what we say the level 1. And when we go to level 2, that means it should provide level 1 plus we should also be able to create mailboxes and domain names in UTF-8. So these are few different type of levels that we have at the moment. So if you if you're going to use some mail server software, or if you're going to use some mail client program and so on, you may be able to actually see what type of level or what is the possibility of support of that particular application. All right, so we have had some discussion so far. So out of these discussions, what we had so far, let us try to do a small quiz. This is not a difficult quiz at all, but just for you to be engaged and then try to review what we have been discussing, right? Okay, the first question, maybe what we can do is you can type into the chat window and then we can discuss the answers. So the first quiz is, you can see, applications present internationalized domain names and email addresses to users in the following encoding formats. So there are a few formats you can find. Type your answer into the chat window so that we can see your answers. So I see a lot of you saying UTF-8. Any other different answer? Yeah, seems that number of people think it's UTF-8. Yes, the answer is correct, and it is UTF-8, right? So in case if someone is confused, as I said, we are not considering ASCII here, because ASCII is the traditional encoding scheme that we have been using. And then UTF-16 and 32 also we don't use because UTF-8 is used for all those optimal reasons that I explained you earlier, right? Okay, let's go to another question. Is .IEEE a valid top-level domain? Okay, a lot of you quickly say yes. How did you say yes, actually? How did you, was it in your, was it already in your mind that it is a correct one? How do you know whether it's not a correct one? Where do you check that? Yeah, yeah, good point, Chamra. Yes, it can also be registered as a long top-level domain. But how do, because the whole idea here is that we have to verify, right? So how do you verify that? I think Samad has given some hint over there in the chat.
Go to INA data and you can verify the all top level domain name is there.
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly. So thanks, Rajiv. So as Samad has also actually provided the link, you can go to the iana.org and the list of TLDs, the valid TLDs can be found over there, right? So basically you have to check the IANA database to make sure whether in this case .IEEE is a valid top level domain. There are over 1,000 over 1,000 of these new generic top level domains over there, and then you can validate whether whether it's the right one. Because sometimes you will also have to be aware of this, because especially when you develop some of the applications, if you are doing some parsing based on say the traditional ones, that is not correct, right? So you should always refer to the IANA list to make sure that the proper TLD list is being considered, because the top level domains can can go and come, right? So tomorrow we may have a new top level domain, and then tomorrow we may, one of the existing top level domain may disappear from the root zone. So this is why actually it is important to consider the valid top level domain list, especially when you're developing your applications, parsing, and so on. We should always consider the IDNA 2008 standard for these, and we will later have some mention about the IDNA standard as well. Yeah, so yeah, basically the idea of there's a point that whether valid means whether it's registered. Yes, that is the expectation. Actually, it is a registered and a valid top level domain, right? All right. So I hope this point is very clear, because we wanted to make sure that you are quite well aware of where these top level domains are available, and then where you can see the list and so on, right? And then let's go into some more discussion on configuring for EAI. What are the considerations that we have to be aware here? There are some prerequisites for setting up EAI. Now, first of all, there's something called normalization. Now, this is actually, say, if you are typing local language character, basically a glyph, right? If you are typing a glyph, that can be input in say multiple ways. You can have a multiple key sequence, or it could be a single key sequence. So in this case, you may give different code points or Unicode points, right? Now here in this case, if you consider this example, Now, if you consider this E with the accent, right? Because this is a glyph, a local language script, E with the accent. So if you type that, you may able to type that using a multiple key sequence, in this case, a simple E plus the accent. So this may involve two Unicode code points, basically, right? Or the it could be, just the single glyph here. In this case, this would be the code point. So however, the way that we are providing the input, the bit stream, right? Because the bit stream has to be unique to the device. So this is quite important consideration. So this is why we have to do something called normalization. So that need to be done by the application first. And then also actually there are some representations that we consider here. That stands for U label and A label, right? So U label is actually based on the Unicode label, and A label is the ASCII label. Now, when it comes to say, if you consider the language scripts, obviously now you have in Unicode, it's much a larger set, but if you are to consider the U label representation, it is more of a subset of that, because we're not going to have every character in Unicode to represent in a domain name. Okay, so anyway, we call this as a U label, and then the A label is your ASCII label. So this U label that would get converted to this ASCII label. Now, when in this conversion, actually always we will have xn hyphen hyphen in the front, xn hyphen hyphen in the front, and this is actually what we call a punicode. So basically, the whole string is an ASCII string, or simply what we call an A label, right? So this U label, in this case, this example U label, gets converted into this A label. Okay, so that's the difference between the U label and the A label. Now, also, I was earlier, slightly mentioning about a standard. Now, since the internationalized domain names were, introduced and so on, there have been some standards. There have a couple of standards. The first standard came in 2003, and that is actually called the IDNA. IDNA stands for Internationalized Domain Name for Applications, 2003 standard. And then, but that is not, it's old now. And the new standard is actually called IDNA 2008 standard, right? So if you are referring to any of the, say, libraries, or, if you're considering this standard, you have to look into the IDNA 2008 standard always, okay? So that's the important thing. And also, as we discussed earlier, we should always consider the valid list of top-level domains. Do not actually go and have a static list of top-level domains by any assumption. We should always see the IANA list of TLDs, for the regular updates. So that is quite important. And then also, actually, if you're using any, as a developer, if you're using some regular expressions, say for input validations, in this case, again, use the IDNA 2008 libraries. That is quite important, right? And don't just do parsing without, considering these IDNA 2008 libraries. That is important as well. So these are some of the prerequisites in setting up EAI. All right. Now, there are some protocol changes when it comes to EAI. Now, first of all, earlier, if you remember that I went through some of the elements, within the mail delivery. We talked about MUAs, we talked about MSAs, MTAs, and then MDAs and so on, right? So in between these different elements, we use different protocols for communication, right, between those servers. And when we are talking about, say, the MTAs, they use this protocol SMTP, right? We know that we use SMTP, and then we have to make sure that SMTP is augmented to support EAI, which means, SMTP should be capable of supporting EAI, right? So that is quite important. Now, so for this purpose, there is a particular signaling flag, and this signaling flag is called SMTP UTF-8, because UTF-8 is the encoding scheme that we use. So the signaling flag is SMTP UTF-8. So we need to actually make sure our mail servers can SMTP, allows or support this signaling. And then also another important consideration is that all SMTP servers in the path should support EAI for the successful delivery of email, because as I told you even earlier, sometimes there could be some multiple mail servers in the path, right? And also, in the DNS, we may have actually a number of MX records. So depending on the priorities, sometimes the mail delivery path could go through different mail servers as well. So this is why it is important that all those SMTP servers in the path we should be able to support EAI, because if any of the SMTP servers do not support EAI, then we will not be able to deliver the email, right? Okay, now when it comes to the mail delivery agents, we use POP and IMAP protocols. And again, just like in SMTP, we should also be able to have a provisioning for POP and IMAP to understand UTF-8. So again, there is a flag there in the configuration as well. So this should also support EAI. Okay. So these are key considerations in terms of protocols. So let us also have a quick look at an example here. When an email is being delivered, when the sender is sending an email. So you can see all those MUAs. In this case, of course, we are considering that SA is already built into the MTA function. That is a pretty common case. And so in between MTAs, so when this mail server is sending a mail to this mail server, obviously we use the protocol SMTP, right? So initially the mail servers will have a connection. So the sending server will send a connection request. So the receiver will send a reply code. Usually, you'll see these reply codes generally, when it starts with a 2, that means it's a success, right? And so in this case, the receiver will send the receiving domain. And then in this case, it is extended SMTP, right? And then sender can basically start basically sending the hello message or extended hello message with the sender's domain. And then receiver will have to actually say what sort of signaling it can support. So it will send, say, for example, in this case, 8-bit MIME, so which means the sender can send things like attachments and so on. And then also it will say there is the signaling flag SMTP UTF-8. Receiver will say receiver can support SMTP UTF-8. So which means, so this is very important. This is the key when it comes to support for the support of EAI. Basically, the receiving mail server should be able to send the signaling flag SMTP UTF-8. So the sending mail server knows that it can understand EAI and start sending basically, EAI-based email addresses and then the message. So the sender will send the from message. So this is actually you can see it's a EAI. And then also then after that, the receiver, once it is accepted, it can send the data. The data can be followed. Okay, so the data, as we said earlier, the data is pretty much the email message. It's not in the discussion of this case, but it is important for the header, the envelope, and the header to provide that support. Okay.
Champika, we have a question in the chat.
Oh, yes.
From Maria.
Yes, let's let me quickly look at the chat. What is the difference between SMTP UTF-8 and UTF-8 SMTP? Yeah, actually, UTF-8 SMTP was the earlier, was defined earlier, and that is being replaced with the SMTP UTF-8. So we should now consider SMTP UTF-8. UTF-8 SMTP was the older sort of version. That's the difference. So when it comes to the protocol changes in the delivery part, as I said, in this whole part, to send and receive an email with EAI, all the email parties involved in the delivery part, they have to, they should be updated their systems to support the EAI. So this is very important. And in case if even a single SMTP server in the part does not support EAI, then you will not be able to deliver the email. So this is very important. Again, if you are, as I said earlier, if you are specifying some MX records in the DNS records, make sure that all those mail servers can, the host names, the mail servers can support EAI, because we don't know which path it's going to take. Because say, for example, you have 3 mail servers with certain priorities, and then 2 of those can support EAI, and then 1 cannot support EAI, then sometimes the internationalized email will get delivered if it goes through the ones that can support. But then if it goes through the other one which cannot support, then the email will not get delivered. So you will find that user will encounter that sometimes the email get delivered, sometimes the email doesn't get delivered. So there is always that confusion. So that is why it is important to make sure that all mail servers, we should be able to support EAI. What other considerations that we should have here? So what happens when one SMTP server in the path does not support EAI? Obviously, then, as we discussed, the email will not be delivered. So because the next hop is not going to accept it. So then we have to then drop that delivery. And then the sender should be given basically a report saying the mail cannot be delivered, right? So that should be the process. Now, there are also some additional considerations we have to consider. Now, in traditional ASCII-based email deliveries, we can, or even the emails, whether it's the case folding doesn't really matter, right? So we can have a mailbox with the uppercase or lowercase. It will be delivered to the same mailbox. Now, so by automatically, this is not being accepted by the EAI ready software, because we can't have the differentiation between the upper cases and lower cases. Actually, in most cases, we are talking about local language scripts here. So you don't really have that uppercase and lowercase issue, because in English, of course, we have uppercase and lowercase, but in many of the scripts, we don't have that issue. And but this is not automatically, obviously, supported. So this is something to consider in EAI. And then when also actually when it gets to spam, we should still consider all our general spam handling should happen as always, like things like SPF or DKIM. These mechanisms should still be followed. That is all fine. But when you use some spam filtering software, sometimes because you have these local language scripts characters, then that might still filter these, considering it's a spam, right? So this is something that you will need to actually be aware. And also, if again, if there are some developers here who are actually doing spam, anti-spam products or spam delivery related mail applications, consider that aspect as well, because we should not be really filtering based on that. And then software and services, again, not every server or client software supports EAI as well. So this is again something that we have to be aware. So this is also why actually we want to actually share this current status with some of the available tools and services. So these are different products and yeah, tools and services that you will see. And then also you can see because different elements that what we discussed earlier, MUAs, MSAs, MTAs, and so on, which part, what is the support based on every of those elements. Earlier we went through some of these L2, L1, what do you mean by L1, what do you mean by L2, and so on. So L1 is basically you cannot create a mailbox. In L2 we can still create mailboxes and so on. So when you are selecting your applications, you may want to consider this factor as well. There are some applications that we have not tested. So those ones are in red here. We say they are not tested, but generally this can be a reference as well. So if you refer to this UASG 030 document, there is a paper that evaluates a number of these applications and provide the current support with regard to those tools and services. Okay, I think now let us go to another quiz here, just to get some refresh. So quiz number 3 is the following statement true or false? For email address internationalization to work, all MTAs should support SMTP UTF-8 signaling flag. Is this true or false? Yeah, so I can see few people saying true. Yeah, any other different answers here? Yes, along the delivery path, all the MTAs, whether they should support SMTP UTF-8. Yes, the answer is correct. It is true. And the people who already said true, that is, you're right. Okay. All right. So next question. Which of the following statements are true when sending and receiving an email with EAI? First one, all email parties nodes involved in the delivery path have to be updated for EAI support. B, if a single SMTP server in the path does not support EAI, then the email will not be delivered. POP IMAP servers could provide downgraded emails to non-EAI confirming clients or confirming email clients, but this is not recommended. And then none of the above. What do you think? Okay, so we have some different answers. So when someone say all true, does that mean number 4 is also true? None of the above? D excludes. Okay. So we have mix of answers. We have B, D, some says A and B. A and B, a lot of you say A and B. Anyone say C? Yeah. So Mahesh says A and A, B, and C, I assume, because you excluded D. All right. So actually here, Mahesh, you're correct, because the answer is A, B, and C. Obviously, a lot of people said A and B. All email parties nodes involved in the delivery path have to be updated for EAI support. Yes, that is right. That's what we discussed. If a single SMTP server in the path does not support EAI, then obviously the email will not be delivered. So B is also right. And remember, you can have multiple answers. That's why we said following statements, in case if you only provided only one answer. And then if you look at C, POP and IMAP servers could provide downgraded emails to non-EAI confirming email clients, but this is not recommended. Actually, this part is right? POP and IMAP servers could provide a downgraded email to non-EAI confirming email clients. So this is actually, here we are talking about MDA, the delivery, right? That is where we use POP and IMAP. So you can still give the client kind of a downgraded version. So when I say downgraded version, basically, you don't consider the EAI stuff and it just send it off. But then the problem is then the client will not be able to see those characters properly, right? So instead of seeing the proper glyphs, you might see some squares or, and also if that receiver has to respond back, then you'll have issues in sending back, replying back to the email ID and so on. So this is why actually, because of these issues, because of these confusions, it is not really recommended actually to downgrade the emails in this case. So C is also correct. So the correct answer is actually A, B, and C. And D is of course wrong because we still have answers here. Okay. All right. I hope this discussion has been useful. And now I will hand it over to Sarmad to do the next part. Sarmad, over to you.
Thank you, Champika. So let's continue with the last part of this webinar, which is more focused on the left-hand side of the @sign, which is what we call the mailbox name, and not the domain name part of it, which is at the right side of the @sign. So next slide, please. So we've actually, the community at ICANN through Universal Acceptance Steering Group have done, collectively done some work where they've listed some considerations for mailbox names. And what I'll do is present some of those considerations for all of us to sort of note when we are setting up our email box names. So this is what Champika discussed earlier for level 2 support. So one of the first things when we are supporting EAI is that we need to understand which scripts we would like to support. So for example, Unicode has many different scripts, more than 140 scripts which are encoded in Unicode. So one of the first things we need to discuss and decide is who are we targeting as users, and as far as that is concerned, what are the main scripts which will be relevant, and for creating mailbox names. And also, I think while we are configuring our script in our email servers, we also need to understand whether there are additional scripts which are obviously involved from send and receive point of view. However, from a creation point of view, we need to be especially careful when we're creating mailbox names, whether any of those scripts we are considering will have any security issues or confusion between names, and make sure that when we set a policy to create such names, those security and confusion issues are actually addressed properly. The second consideration, of course, is the length of the mailbox name. So normally, any mail administrator would have some level of policy on the maximum length and a mailbox name may have. So for example, you could have mailbox names with, you can limit them to 10 characters or 20 characters. In ASCII, when you're shifting the same thing to UTF-8, you would need to understand that the byte size, so to speak, will be slightly different than the character length side, because the way UTF-8 does its conversion from characters to 8-bit sequences, it's not one-to-one. So there are some parts of Unicode which are converted from a single byte to a single byte, so a character to a single byte. However, there are some other parts of Unicode which may get converted from one character into 2 bytes or 3 bytes, and so on. So you need to make sure that if you were maybe allowing ASCII names to be 10 characters, and you also want the local language mailbox names to be 10 characters, the number of bytes may actually be longer. So those kind of constraints need to be evaluated when you're defining your policy. Similarly, script mixing is something which you should consider, because it sometimes has security issues, because sometimes you can get very similar looking or same glyphs across different scripts, for example, between Cyrillic script and Latin script, or Cyrillic script or Greek script, for example. We also see some complexities in scripts used in India, for example. There was some similarities which I found across scripts, which are what I call Neo-Brahmi derived scripts. So you want to make sure that either mailbox names are strictly within a single script, or if you are allowing mixing of scripts, then they are mixed in a way that they do not cause any security issues for end users. Next slide, please. Also, when you are creating mailbox names, you may want to check whether mailbox names, especially in the complex scripts, are well formed. Not all. So normally when we are using ASCII, any character or letter can follow any other letter, so there are no restrictions. However, when we are going into complex scripts like Thai or Lao or Khmer or some of the Indic scripts, um, um, we see that not all characters can freely follow other characters. Um, and there are some restrictions, for example, on when a particular character can actually occur in a string. So there are certain rules on how a well-formed string is actually created. We actually have some reference IDN tables which have been published, which encode some of these rules to make sure that only valid strings are generated. So when you're developing your mailbox policy, those could actually be used as a reference. There are tools available which can be used to check such new strings to validate whether they are well formed or not. So those are some, there's another additional consideration which you need to take to make sure that the string is well formed. Sometimes if the string is not well formed, the fonts may not actually render them well as well. So there are some real issues if you do not actually control for this factor. There are also scripts which are written from right to left instead of left to right. And in that case, especially if you're mixing right to left and left to right scripts, that can create a very significant amount of confusability for end users and therefore potential security issues. So you have to be careful in that context as well. Um, you should also consider allowing aliases and display name considerations. In EAI, there can be, when we're using Unicode, there can be more than one way you can represent a particular email address, including the left-hand side and the right-hand side of the @ sign. Um, for example, uh, domain name can be represented in U label format versus A label format. Um, we also talked about, for example, uppercase versus lowercase, which have to be handled explicitly in EAI and so on. So there may be reasons why you want to create multiple aliases and display names for EAI. And if that is the case, you may want to allow users options to create these names and allow multiple names for a particular mailbox. Next slide, please. Finally, when we are going into creating mailbox names, there are some symbols and signs which are allowed. So, for example, in the left-hand side, we can normally sometimes use dots or hyphens or plus signs. Um, There, when we go into our own local languages, we have additional signs and symbols which are available to us. So we should um, see which of those symbols or signs should we allow in addition to the regular characters used to write the language as part of the mailbox name. We should take a conservative uh, uh, sort of look at it. We shouldn't allow this, all the different signs and uh, symbols, make sure those which are allowed do not cause any security and confusability issues for end users. And then we should also make sure that we handle Unicode normalization. As Champika shared earlier, there can be a same string can actually be represented in multiple ways within Unicode. And one way to handle it is to support these multiple ways of representing a string and map them all onto the single mailbox. The other mechanism is to convert all of them into a single form. And if that is the case, we normally the study recommends that NFC form be used uh, and then used to represent the mailbox name. And actually, all other forms get converted into the NFC form. Um, so next slide, please. And this is the final slide. When we go into local languages, what we've also found is that there may be more than one way to write a string which is considered the same by the end user. So you can write two different strings technically, but because they are visually distinct, visually the same, or in some other cases, for example, in Chinese, even though they're visually not the same, but simplified Chinese and traditional Chinese are considered equivalent strings by end users. So what is requested from the mailbox, email administrators, is that you should be familiar with what your end users for the particular script consider same mailbox names, and make sure that the same mailbox names are given to the same single person or entity and not given to different entities, because otherwise that will cause, again, confusion and possible security issues. And there is data available through reference ID and tables which actually address this for domain names, and similar policy, for example, could be extended for mailbox part as well. Um, and one last thing on this slide is the that when you are representing domain names, they actually can be represented in a U-label format or a A-label format. Um, so many of the tools which handle emails may not consider these two as equivalent forms. Some of them may actually map these domain name part and email part, sorry, the domain name in A-label form or in the U-label form onto each other, but in some cases you have to manage that more explicitly. But that conversion is normally um, sort of needed for the domain name part. The A-label, U-label conversion is not the recommended mechanism to handle um, uh, conversions for mailbox names. So for mailbox names, uh, we normally only support the UTF-8 format, and there is no ASCII equivalent format for that. So we need to sort of make sure that when we are using A labels, those are normally generally just for the domain name part. Next slide, please. So based on these, let's also now take a couple of questions and see if you can respond to them. Next slide. So here are five statements. Could you take a moment to read through them and list which of these are actually false? You can type your answers in the chat. So could you list the options which are false? All right, we'll see if you're still working on it. So just give you another minute. All right, we have some input on the first five. Any input on E? All right, so let's go through these options. The first one, that universal acceptance is a state in which all valid domain names and email addresses are accepted, validated, stored, processed, and displayed correctly and consistently, is a true statement. That is how we define the universal acceptance or defined the universal acceptance at the beginning of this presentation. Part B, to achieve universal acceptance, Internet applications and systems must treat all top-level domains in consistent manner, including new generic TLDs as well as the internationalized TLDs. That is also true, that it should all applications should accept all the valid delegated TLDs. C is all domain names should be validated against internationalized domain names in applications standard IDNA 2003 standard. That is actually false. There is a new standard now, IDNA 2008, and all the domain names should be validated against IDNA 2008, not IDNA 2003, which is the older version of the standard. Part D is the A label represents a domain label in UTF-8 format. That is also false. A label is the ASCII representation, not the UTF-8 representation. The UTF-8 representation is normally referred to as the U label, not the A label. And finally, the A label format is used to represent mailbox names in EAI. This is also false because normally EAI, in EAI, mailbox names are represented in UTF-8 format, and A label is not UTF-8 format. And for, as I just shared, for mailbox name, it is not part of the protocol to convert the UTF-8 U label format into the A label format for mailbox names. That is what is done for the right side of the @sign, the domain name part, but not the left-hand side of the @sign, the mailbox name part. So C, D, and E are false. Let's go to the next slide. So we have one more question before you go. We conclude this session, and I'd request Champika to maybe copy the string in the chat for us. So that idea is that this is a U label given to you, and we are requesting you to suggest what is the asking you what is the A label version of this U label, and see if you can convert this. So let's first post this in the chat, this string, so that that can help you. So I posted the string in the chat. You could
thanks, Abad.
Copy it from there. And could you give us the A label version? We've actually given a link to a tool. It's lgrtool.icann.org, but you can also use other tools or other mechanisms to make that conversion. Let's see if you could do that and share the A label version in the chat. Right. And for those who are still working on it, if you use the tool which is provided by ICANN, if you go to this tool, you'll see a label form button on the top towards the right. You can click there and paste the string. Make sure when you paste the string, there are no spaces before or after the string. And then you can get all the different versions from this tool. All right, so it seems like most of you have been able to do this. We actually are um, having some technical issues with um, I think Champika has to restart his uh, Zoom, so we'll get this presentation up shortly. Let's see. So, Molly, if you could make me a co-host, maybe I can share it since Champika is having some challenges.
Hello, Smith. You can share it, actually.
Okay. All right. So I think we're back. All right. So um, we have the right answer in the chat. So thank you all for going through and doing that conversion. We can now move on to the next slide. I think at the end of the day, we would want all of you. So universal acceptance configuration of EI support cannot actually be done by one person, right? We saw that uh, all the if the sender and receiving side and all the intermediate servers need to be properly configured for an email address to be delivered end to end. And for that purpose, not only do I need to, for example, configure my servers to support EAI, I would also want all the other servers hosted by all of you, for example, to support EAI if I have to send an EAI email from myself to you or receive your email on my servers. So all of us need to take proactive measures to support EI on our side so that we can actually be able to deliver it end to end. Next slide, please. For that purpose, I think we would eventually encourage all of you to get involved, go and check your own servers, make sure that they are EI compliant. And if they're not EI compliant, upgrade these servers using some of the tools we'd shared or other tools and services. Um, and make sure that they're EI compliant. While you are supporting EAI or configuring for EAI, you may, for example, get some technical issues. If that's the case, we have plenty of information available. We've already shared some links of reports. But before we, I also wanted to point out that we are also, thanks to THNIC, started an APAC region EAI implementers group. And we do have Porchanan here. And I'd like to see if Porchanan, you want to come in very briefly and introduce the APAC EAI implementers group to all of us and how you would be able to support us if some of us are going to have some technical questions around EAI.
Okay, thank you so much. About the group that actually we work together as you also help us, motivate us to help in this technical implementation, maybe a channel that we can use for create awareness of EI together, especially between members in APAC, and also we may outreach to relevant technical stakeholders in your countries to join in this to discuss and exchange the idea of how to implement that, and also sometimes the problem that we can arise and suggest how to solve it, and also the maybe a platform not between our or only within the APAC region, but maybe from technical personnel around the world to help us in implementing this to be successful implementing this. So I may invite everyone who interested in that may join us, and we help to modulate that by Mr. Titipong. He also in this session also, because we have done that for a few years and we have experiences in some technical specific software or how to implement or solve some problems within this area. So we are welcome to let everyone join the list. Okay, the list, I will send the list into the chat channel later. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And the link to this email list is also provided through the link in this um, presentation. So you can go to that link, sign up to this mailing list. And this mailing list is about, if you're trying the EAI out as a follow-up of this training, and you have any technical questions, you can ask them on this mailing list, and people who are in this mailing list will help you address those technical queries. And again, thank you to THNIC for hosting this. We also have support available through ICANN and USG. You can send queries to info@usg.tech or uaprogram@icann.org. And we also have many materials available at usg.tech website. We also run working groups within the community, run by the community itself. We support that work through what is called the Universal Acceptance Steering Group. You're all very welcome to join their working groups and contribute more directly as well. Next slide, please. And here are some of the links to reports which UASG has published over past few years, which focus on different aspects of email address internationalization. These can give you an overview and more details about some of the technical policy and other details around EAI. So these are here for your reference in case you want to read them to get more details. Next slide, please. So that brings us to the conclusion of this particular webinar. We're happy to answer any questions. You may also reach out to us directly if you like as a follow-up. And with that, let me hand it back to Leonid. Thank you all for participating actively in the quizzes and for your questions. Thank you, Champika, as well. And back to you, Leonid.
Thank you, Sarmad. Before we conclude, I wonder if there are any questions. I mean, I guess Sarmad and Champika are happy to respond to them. Asking once, asking twice, asking thrice. Okay, no questions. Will, we are just well over the top of the hour, but I think that was quite interesting. I mean, at least it kept me awake. So it's a good sign that it was an exciting webinar. I would like then to conclude it by thanking the ICANN team and Sarmad and Champika for their time. I would also like to thank everyone on call for staying with us. I can see that we had like 27 people at peak. And I would also like to thank Molly for her support and for doing a great job for all of us. And as a reminder, we have been recording this session. So if you need just to refresh your memory, then please go to YouTube and check it out there. I mean, it will be uploaded very soon. And again, as a reminder, it's just the groundbreaking webinar in a series of webinars on universal acceptance that ICANN and APTLD will be happy to deliver between now and May. And let's hope that after that, we will all reconvene physically in person and we'll have a chance to trade our expertise in different areas. Meanwhile, please keep safe and let's hope that this nightmare with COVID will be over anytime soon. Thank you very much and good luck. Thank you. Enjoy your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Leonid, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank